Hello, and welcome to the next presentation of Lean Apps. In this video, we are going to talk about user story slicing. Let's begin. I am Narjeet. I am the CEO of Lean Apps, and these are my hashtags: Lean Innovation, Design Thinking, Agile, and Digital Transformation. These are some of the customers we are working with. Now, in the last video, we saw how to write a user story with the one-liner and with acceptance criteria, and we also defined some kind of a visual representation of a story. Now, before we write user stories, we also have to think about slicing the story. Slicing of the story is important because you want the story to fit within the sprint. So when we start the sprint, we pull the user story to be done in that sprint. And we have to make sure that by end of the sprint, the story is complete. And at Lean Apps, we usually use 2 weeks of sprint. So we have to make sure that the story is doable within those two weeks. Second thing is, the smaller the story is, the less would be the risk of the story failing, that is team not delivering, because by slicing the story, you are also kind of slicing the complexity and you're trying to make it as small as possible to fit within the sprint. Now, when I say slicing the story, think about is like there is, let's take an example of a taxi app, and think of a feature of booking a taxi as one of the big features within the app. And booking now could have multiple stories where I want to see the list of all the taxis around me. I want to see them in a list, and I also want to see them on a map. I want to see those little cars moving on the map, how they're moving. And then you can think of getting car details, the driver details. So within the booking, there are a lot of different small user stories. And all these things can become a user story potentially. So that's why you want to break the complete feature into small user stories. That's why slicing is important. Now, to do slicing of user stories, I'm taking the knowledge from Mike Cohn, which he shared in one of his videos. And he was using this acronym called SPIDR without an E, which basically is an acronym for spikes, paths, interfaces, data, and rules. So we'll look into each one of these and see how these will be helpful to help us slice the stories. Now let's look into spikes. So spikes, we're starting with spikes, but this important point to note here is that this is one thing you should use as a last resort when you cannot slice the story with other ways of slicing. And the spike basically means that there won't be, like, doing the spike story won't necessarily give you a business value at the end of the day for the end user. It will be more like a learning story or gaining a knowledge to do a real story. And a good example here is like if your team is going and doing something new in technology which they've never worked on, they want to check the feasibility of something, it's an unknown territory, then the spike is usually used. So let's say an example is your team has never worked on building a chatbot. So before they implement a chatbot for your website or your web product, what they will do is they will create a technical spike story to learn how a chatbot should be built. What are the industry standards of chatbot, good practices, and the idea is that they will learn everything around it before they go and implement a real story on chatbot. Usually the output of such a story would be mostly a documentation of what they've learned. And secondly, it could be a small prototype which they've built to prove what they have learned is actually working. Once this knowledge is completely onboarded, they can basically go and implement the real chatbot development in the next sprints. So this is where you create spikes. Okay, the second one is paths, and path is usually it refers to the steps taken to do a task or a job by a user on your product. And to do a same task, there could be multiple ways of doing it. And I'll take an example of Amazon, which comes to my mind, where while you're checking out on Amazon, you can go from adding it to the cart. The cart can go to your address page, to your how you're going to pay will be the next page, and then you go to the final checkout page, and then you check out. And then they offered a one-click checkout where you basically, within a click, you can reach to the last page and check it out. So there are two paths, and usually these two will go as different user stories. Another example which I've written here is, let's take a story in which the user wants to be able to pay for purchases online. So it's an online payment on an online store. Now, there could be two ways to pay. One is by credit card, another is by PayPal. So you can split these stories as two different stories. Now, one can argue that within credit card, there could be MasterCard, Visa, and American Express, and more. But usually, because you're dealing with one payment provider, usually most of the cases, so, and all of these can go in one story because you're just integrating with one payment provider. So you have to split wherever it makes sense. Okay, now, next one is interface. Interface is basically whenever you're doing the product development, you try to build products for different devices, and this could be called different interfaces. So it could be a web product, a mobile product, or any other smart device product like a watch. So, or if you're creating a story, you can create different stories for each interface. You can also further divide that into iOS, Android, Windows, Mac, depending on which all platforms you're targeting. And another thing which I usually take care of is the browser versions, because there are some few adjustments which are required for each browser. So you can also create that as different stories. So yeah, all these different interface combinations can be different stories, and this is how you can split it. Next is data. So this is about on the screen, so there is underlying data which is sitting in your database, and how do you slice and dice the data, and how you present this to the user is what we mean by data here. Now, I'll take an example of the taxi app from our previous videos as well. And let's say I am now a rider. I log in, and there are taxis which I can see from like how far they are from me. So that's how it's sorted. And what I can do is I can further give filters on by rating of the driver, brand of the car. And so basically it's a similar data, but it's kind of sorted in a different way. So all of these small things, like all these sorting categories or criteria, can go as different user stories. So this is what data means. Okay, next one would be rules. So the idea of rules is that there are business rules in all the products which we build, some or the other business rules. And what we want to do is we want to procrastinate when we're developing. We want to procrastinate some business rule, and this is another way of splitting the story. So the procrastination, by that I mean that we can build a system which does not have a rule, so it kind of allows all the combinations, and then slowly, as at different stories, we start putting one rule at a time. So again, I'll take an example of a taxi app. Let's say there is a business rule that says one user can only order one taxi. So till the time I have paid for that taxi, the driver is confirmed, I should not be allowed to take another taxi. Let's say that's a business rule. So our first user story could be without any constraints. Simply, yeah, I can order a taxi. I can book a taxi. So it doesn't matter how many I'm booking, but there is no business rule implemented. And that can go to the user, and they can use as that. And then later on, we can have a second user story which introduces this rule, where we have all these criteria and combinations built, where if I'm in a taxi riding, I haven't, till the time my driver confirms that I have paid, I cannot order another taxi. And this could go as a second user story. It actually reminds me of another case where Tesla did something similar, where I think after charging, the car was fully charged at the charging point. There was no restriction on how long you're going to park there. But later on, there was some complaint on the customer support, or I think somebody tweeted directly to Elon Musk, and he introduced a constraint that after your charging is complete, your credit card will start getting charged for the time you're parked on the charging point. So that was a business rule which came in as a different story. Okay, so this is something I've taken an example. So Bitcoin is getting popular, so I took this example. I was looking at one of these Bitcoin ticker app. So I will highlight how I would split. Like, let's say this is a screen which is being delivered by my UX expert, and now within this there are multiple stories I can show you. Like you see here, USD is selected, And this is one of those markets where the price of Bitcoin is shown, and these are different markets you see. So I can do all these combination of USD in this market, USD in this market, USD in this market. Then I can have Euro in this market, similar setup, and this goes on. And it changes price. You see, if it's USD Kranken and USD Bitstamp, there are two different prices in these two markets. And then the other combinations with the Euro and Kranken, I'm getting this in Euro now. So all these things, all these combinations will become one. This is one story. USD Kranken is one story, one combination. USD Bitstamp can be another combination, and then you can have Euro and Kranken another combination. So this is how you can start splitting. You also see there are like different filters here. Like it's showing me that particular day how the graph is, and then there are different ways to do it: hourly, minutes, with week, month, and all these things can be different user stories. I'm just thinking a lot here. These could also be, these are special values which are calculated, could all go as different user story one at a time, and would add value. So this is how you start splitting the stories within your product. Okay, this was all about splitting the stories. So if you have any questions around this, please drop me an email and I'll be happy to answer. So see you later.